Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk About It. We're here to talk about and destigmatize childhood sexual crimes. Many people don't want to talk about it. We do. We are prisoners by crimes that we didn't commit. So today with me, I have Carol Boyce. She is the author of First, I Believe You, a true story of healing from hidden memories of severe childhood trauma. I'm so excited to be here. I've read her entire story and it very much mirrors mine. And so, with that, a very candid heart, we approach this talk today. Carol, I first want to start with why you are here today and motivated to share your story and be with us. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you and just in your own words, tell us why you're here today.
And Jody, I want to applaud you for writing your book, which is so exciting to have that on the, in the world stage of recovering from child sexual abuse and other trauma, and let you know how much I appreciate you allowing me to give voice to what happened to me also. So thank you so much for that. And what I'm here for today is I want to really let survivors know there's hope and that the world gets a lot better after we really confront what happened to us. I want psychologists and the professionals in the field, psychiatrists, to fully understand traumatic amnesia as related to sexual abuse and to very young abuse, which it's highly correlated with. And I want the stories to get out there. I want people speaking up about the horrors of what happened to them and let others know how prevalent it is and what it takes to recover.
It's awesome. And you're right. For the person who's listening and it hasn't happened to you, I'll tell you 1 in 4 women, 1 in 5 men, and those are only of the people that come forward. I would never be part of that statistic because I never put my name in the hat, which is probably true for 70 or 80% of us. So with that, I want to go back to Carol. And Carol, I know it's hard. Your story encompasses your entire childhood, your growing years, your teen years. So I want you to just kind of start with us in the story where you'd like to start it at, and we'll have a lot of opportunity today to discuss things, but just bring us into your story where you'd like to start it and how it came back to you and all of that. So I'm just going to give it back to you.
Oh, thank you. So my story started with a family that had high curb appeal. We looked good. There were 4 children. My mom and dad were married. It was an intact family. I had a lot of privilege. My father was a cardiologist, an internist, and quite revered in our community. Everything looked great. It even looked great to me, but I couldn't understand why I felt so horrible. There was a lot of alcoholism. My mother was raging to my father's passivity. He was a kind man. I loved him dearly. And, you would never know. He never raised his voice. He, was calm, professional. And, but again, I knew I couldn't go to sleep at night. I would lay down and I knew not to go to sleep, but I had no idea why. I had no idea what was really going on in our home. And then when I left home, particularly my anxiety and my fears started really growing. I apparently felt safe at home, which is very strange. And when I left, I started getting panic attacks. I had tremendous anxiety, unusual fears, overwhelming emotion. I could cry and cry and cry. I had no idea why. I had no idea where it was coming from. And I ended up getting married. I finished college, got married, had 2 little children. And again, it was just getting worse to where I really couldn't keep my mental health under control. I couldn't function. And yet I was trying desperately to keep my family together. And many things were happening. My father got extremely rejecting of me. So he went from this normal father to telling me to get lost. I wasn't his daughter anymore. And not telling my other siblings that. I couldn't figure it out, and I was deeply hurt and didn't know what was going on. One time he came for Thanksgiving, and my mother had passed away. And my little 4-year-old daughter asked if she could sleep with him that night. She just wanted to snuggle in his bed with him. And he said, well, I'd be accused of molesting you if you did that. And it was the first time I had ever heard that word come out of his mouth. It was, I just couldn't understand why he would say that. And then he cornered me and said, you had a really good childhood, except for a few things. He said to me. I didn't know what he was talking about. But after that point, I couldn't keep the lid on what had actually happened anymore. I finally put it together. I had gone therapist after therapist after therapist. They had no idea what was wrong with me. I had a few insinuate I was crazy, which was my greatest fear. I really thought I was crazy. And it finally came together to me. And in one moment, I realized that I had been molested by my father. And at that point, it was like a dam broke. Where I was really suffering before, I was now flooded. I had never processed a single memory, a single incident of being sexually assaulted by him. And all of a sudden now I had all of it, and I was just flooded, with terror. Terror was probably the primary thing I felt from the sexual assaults. So, and then as the book goes into a lot of the techniques I used to try to recover. So.
Right. I in chapter 26, you say the title is The Devastating Truth. You say it all swirled in my head until it suddenly stopped. In one instant, it all came together for me. I realized, to my horror, the sexual abuse rang true. My list of symptoms would make sense in the context of sexual abuse. Was this the missing puzzle? And I think when I read those words, Carol, I have to tell you, I was taken aback because I felt like it was a missing puzzle for me too. In my own story, very much the same. It starts when I'm 3. My father rapes me, until I leave his home, and I get married at 18 because I can't wait to get out. But it's the missing puzzle and the amnesia that comes with it, or it's a gift to us. And you said so many things, it's hard for me to even stop and know where to begin. But I think many people have this list of symptoms, but they don't have the answer. It's this missing piece. And many people won't delve into those missing pieces. But talk a little bit about kind of what pushed you into, you say, I felt the same way actually when the murder memory came back. I felt like I was going to lose my mind. And I had to call this lady I was seeing, and she said, Jody, you're making it harder on yourself by not going back into that room. And she walked me through that memory. What led up to, what did that boiling pot look like for you? Because I like to talk about, I'm not going insane, but a memory's trying to break through. What did that look like?
Yeah, very good point. And I think that we need to put a cover over all of this, as these are PTSD symptoms.
Yes.
I had no clue, these panic attacks, these strange fears, this going crazy feeling was all part of post-traumatic stress, and what we now call complex post-traumatic stress, because there's many incidences in there. And I think for me, part of it is feeling shut down, feeling like I have tremendous emotion that's kind of swirling around, and maybe flashes of what I'm going to remember. It's a very lonely, difficult place, and I did
Yes.
eventually learn that meant a memory was trying to emerge.
Right. See, I think that that's so profound in that we think that all these things that are going on in our mind are kind of crazy, like where are they coming from? And I have people talk to me about, I saw this one thing, but it can't be true, and I don't know what it is. And I always say, your mind doesn't make that kind of stuff up. Go with that memory. But
Yeah,
they call it amnesia, and it is, but the truth is it's with us always, right? Like
yeah,
I knew, even though I didn't know that a murder occurred in a motel room, I knew all of my life I had been in a motel room with my dad and Craig. I believed that they had just molested us or, sexually abused us. But I learned later it's different. So with the amnesia, though, there comes this list of symptoms that I think it's really important to recognize. Like you said, this is PTSD. So even though we've blocked it, it never stays away 100%. Would you agree
no,
with that?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's with us. And I actually did quite a bit of research into how this happens. And I
Oh,
go
talk
in more,
about that.
yeah, I go in more detail in my book. And again, a lot of amnesia is from very young, severe
Mm-hmm.
trauma. So when you hear somebody talking about they have no memory, they've probably had very severe things happen to them. But during these things, you're so terrified, you're letting out a ton of chemicals, cortisol, and things that are going to speed up your heartbeat to where you could die from it. And so you have so much
Absolutely.
going on, your body releases another chemical to counteract it so you survive. And they think it's that chemical that puts it into the base of your brain, which is really, that's a whole subject in and of itself. It's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. But they have figured out why we do this and what's actually going on. It's, of course, a protective mechanism.
Right. It's a gift. It's a gift, right?
It's a gift.
When you're going through it, it's a gift.
It's a gift, right?
Yes.
And so, but yeah, it's always there. And like they say now with all the vagal nerve studies that they're doing, this is in your whole body. The trauma, it stays. And we know that, I knew something was horribly wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea what it was, but it was there. It was always simmering there.
Right.
So,
And, Carol, one of the things I think that's so important for us that have lived through this is to understand what our body did, right? It's very hard for our minds to grapple with the effects of this trauma. And so it does make us feel crazy. I often had the vision of this woman that was murdered coming to me, and I'd go to my counselor and say, I feel like her spirit's haunting me. And he would say to me, tell me where you saw her. And when we talked it through, I realized she was walking down towards the chair I was sitting in. But if he hadn't explained it to me, I felt like not only was I terrified that my mind was betraying me, but I was terrified like these spirits were getting me until I understood what my mind was doing. And so I love that you really go into why, I mean, it does matter to survivors what our mind and body has done to help us, right? The
right.
body keeps the score, and it's like it holds these parts for us until we can get back. So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, you go right ahead.
Well, yeah, and it's like, why do we remember when we do? And I
Right.
do think I felt safe enough. I had a stable
Yes.
relationship. I
Mm-hmm.
had my children, and I knew, I had vowed in high school I would never let my children feel what I felt, even though
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what it was from. But I had a real strong feeling of that my children would never go through what I did. And I think, at some point, I must have by 36 felt safe enough in my life that
Mm-hmm.
I could handle it.
I
Um,
agree with you on that. I think that we do know we do have to be in a safe environment. And then we have to have the right questions being asked. Even when your father brought up molestation, that triggered something in you. Those are triggers that happen. And all of a sudden it almost is like he gave you permission, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I wrote this one blog about whose story are you telling? Because we grow up telling the story that they taught us. We don't ever tell our own story until we do, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. It's their narrative that, yeah,
Yes.
family with great curb appeal. Like, and my father has said that, well, I gave you so much,
Right. And those are bribery things as well, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
I write about in my book where my father sends me two $20 bills. When you're first married, you're broke, right?
Yeah,
And you know what I knew in my heart? I didn't have all my memories, but I knew he was bad. And I took those $20 bills in the bathroom and burned them because I didn't want any part of his bribery anymore. And I felt crazy doing it, but I had to be free. Does that,
yeah,
and so when your father would send these things to you, or I'm going to not let you be the executor of my estate,
yeah,
he was telling you, I'm actually going to reject you more if you don't keep telling my story and keep that curb appeal alive, right?
yes. And it was very interesting. My father kind of held it together with me and my relationship. He acted pretty normal till my mother died. And for some reason he must have felt my mother was keeping the secret, or mom was keeping me in line somehow, because as soon as she died he wanted nothing to do with me. And so he went from this stable kind of normal father to, you know, I don't want anything to do with you. I'm not your father. Get out of here. I don't care about my grandchild. Nothing. And of course, I had no idea. He had no idea. I had no memory,
Mhm.
but was, obviously panicking about what I might now say. It's so interesting. They're so short-sighted, these sociopaths.
Mhm.
No thought to when we grow up and when we're
Right.
what we might do. They I don't know if they ever considered that when they were assaulting us.
Well, I think they did consider that because he spent the rest of his life trying to get you to be quiet. But going back to that story that you just told, I think what is hard for us to fathom is they don't care about us. They don't give one iota about us.
No.
We really believed that we were in a love affair with them. They loved us. They
Yeah.
loved us. We were special. We got special treatment that nobody else got. And so we kind of, I don't like the words like happily kept it, but we did exactly what was ingrained in us to do. We kept their secret. We were their special
Yeah.
one. Your mom dies and he just quickly moves on. I've read this other book where the same thing happens. The mom dies and he just quickly moves on because you know why? They don't really give a shit about any of us. But we
Yes.
want to believe that they do somewhere.
Yeah.
It's very that love card. It's a complicated card, right?
It's extremely
Because it's
complicated.
very complicated. And I've had people really come against me about that I can't have compassion for you, Jody, because you hug your father. You should have killed him. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that love card and the complication as you see it.
Well, in some ways, that's the hardest piece.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the hardest piece, right? Because you take this your parent who's supposed to protect you and guide you and love you, that you thought loved you, and find out they're actually a sociopath. They don't have
Mm-hmm.
any feelings for people other than themselves. They could care less what happens to you. They could care less about the impact on you. And this lack of trust, that you trusted somebody so completely, and then you find out they were, horribly untrustworthy. Um, I think I think the loss of that love is profound,
Profound.
and
Yes.
you grieve that. It's this good, bad, dad, bad. I have to really break my father into
Mm-hmm.
two completely different people, because in many ways he was, and probably yours was too. There were
Yes.
both sides. There were
Absolutely. Well, and
one.
and to that point, I often say this, but people think these are leches in the back corner,
Yes,
child molesters. They're ugly, they have no teeth, their hair is unkept. These
yes,
are attractive, successful men that have beautiful families. I like that you say curb appeal. We were mandated to look good. Now, our hair might not have been brushed for the whole
mm,
week, but if we were going to go out and see people, we showed up looking good. My
Oh,
parents
yeah.
were very good looking people,
Hmm.
and we showed well. People wanted to be part of our families. Like, when I was in high school, people would have preferred to come to my home.
Yes.
And so it is this Jekyll and Hyde, this good, bad, but
Mhm.
we really bond to that part that we believe is good. And like you say,
Yeah.
it's what all children desire, is that their
Yeah.
parent loves them. And so the abuse and the rejection that comes in from that, it's almost intolerable to a child to understand that there's no love in the scenario,
Yeah. Yes.
right?
Absolutely. And I think the minute I realized what had happened, I knew my father was out of my life forever. It never even crossed my mind to keep him in my life after that. And I knew, um, I had to relook at love in the family to begin, with everything.
Right.
What
It's
did this?
like the spell has been broken, right?
Yes,
It
yes,
really is like they cast a spell over us. And that
yeah.
spell is profound. And we
Hmm.
stay, enthralled to that. It is, I almost think there's a wicked piece that's involved here, but it is very incredibly complicated.
It's evil. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is evil. I mean, did you feel that
Evil.
your father was dark?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it came out just in the last year that his older brother was also molesting
Yeah, I
the
read that.
grandchildren, was molesting the grandchildren. And that's been a very interesting piece, also horrifying. But so both brothers had this going on. And it's still, when you get to like, there's love of your father, there's also love of your siblings and extended family.
Yes.
And when you come out about this, I was completely rejected by all of them. They to this day don't believe any of it. And even after it came out that his brother was molesting, it didn't change anybody's opinion. So that, the love goes all the way through the family. It's multi-generational. Yeah.
Well, and see, and the point is, I lost my siblings as well. And I used to tell my counselor, they hate me, Redmond, and he'd say, Jody, they don't hate you, they just want you to be quiet. And I
Yep.
do think, in The Body Keeps the Score, he talks about the importance of talking about what you know. And so, but like he says, it takes incredible courage to do that. Unfortunately, our siblings didn't have the courage. What
Hmm.
you find out is that usually there's a lot more victims than come forward. And it had to feel validating for you when, was it your niece that stepped up and said this happened to her from the
Um,
brother?
yes. It was my cousin. She was my cousin.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was
It had to be validating though, right?
yeah. And then we've been able to really support each other, which has been wonderful. And this man did confess to it. He apologized.
Which is very unusual, I have to
Very
say.
unusual. Yeah. He was
Yeah.
under a great deal of pressure, but he did come forward. So
Wow. Wow. And again, hers, as your book said, went from a very young age to very later in life, like
yes.
teen years, right?
Yes, hers stopped when she moved away and she was, 13. So this would have probably kept on going. But it was interesting that, I was a toddler or very
Mhm.
early young child, and she was too, started very young.
Right. These are sins that carry down, and just these generational things that, yeah, and you talk about in your book, you wonder then who was touching your father and his brother, because
Yeah.
does this happen in a vacuum? Probably not,
No,
right?
no.
Yeah.
And
And
I
so,
I do feel very strongly that the father was molesting. He died. There were reasons for that, and I also don't know, but
right. Well, yeah,
obviously both boys were, yeah.
right. So, it's like you
Mhm.
just said, when we come out and talk about it, often we lose our families. They don't stand with us. Although you have kept some contact with them.
Yes,
Right.
that's gotten worse since I published the book. Even though I
Uh,
don't name any of their names, it's made it even worse. Uh, yeah. So, if anything, I thought it would get better. Maybe they would understand better. that did not happen.
Right. Well, and the same with my family. And again, I think honestly, they don't have the courage to be the freedom fighter that you've been, and how important for your voice to come out, because it is for not just us, it's for those behind us and families. Like you said, these are generational things that happen. And you better believe by us not talking, other children are being hurt. And
Yeah.
so I really applaud you for being that voice that came out and then, standing, because that's one of the things that's so important for us to find our voice, is not just for ourselves, but to make sure those children behind us are safe. I wanted to talk about another place in your book where you talk about the blue bat. And so you move into healing now, you're in your 30s. And I really loved that part of your book, because for me, it was part of my healing too. And so talk about the counselor who introduced the blue bat for you and what it was and how it helped you.
Right. So we're talking about the blue foam bat that's actually considered a therapist tool, but it could be almost anything. What I learned early on was I had to get the emotion out of me. That was absolutely critical so that I didn't shut down and be non-functional from, depression. I really feel my depression's related to holding in emotion and not releasing it. And
Absolutely.
so I had kind of a mantra of pound, scream, cry.
I
And
liked that.
pound, scream, cry. And so it was, really sob out the loss, the pain of it, is get those tears out, fill up buckets with your tears. And then pounding with this bat that I was so angry. I don't think we can underestimate the amount of rage and anger we have for what's happened to us. And to
Right.
that rage out, I think it's absolutely critical. Women are taught not to be angry, not to show that. And I think it's absolutely critical that we do. And to rage. So I would get in my car. It was one of the only places I felt where I really had total privacy. And I would get in my car and just driving very slowly, not fast, angry. I could yell out at, whatever I wanted, at my father, at life, at God, at my mother, get this all out. So I also screamed. People find that strange, but I had so much terror in me. I had to scream and scream and scream it out. Now, I'm a singer, so I had to learn to not connect my vocal cords, which sounds very odd. But to this day, there are moments where I need to scream, and it relieves a whole lot of the tension in me. So,
Yes. I love that. When I read that, and I wanted to talk about it, because some of the things that happen when you come through and have this amnesia and this denial is that you're not in touch with who you are. You're not in touch with your
yeah,
emotions. I write about having a tool belt, and I just kept emotions in there because they didn't occur naturally. I couldn't
hmm,
afford to have emotions when I was a child. I would have
yeah,
never survived. Right. And so
totally unsafe.
totally unsafe. Right.
Hmm.
So it's an exercise that brings us back to life. And usually, unfortunately for me, the first emotions I felt were sadness and pain and all of
Yeah,
those things, the confusion. And then in the midst, I'd find happiness. Like when my children were born, of course, I could feel joy and those kinds of things. But in ordinary life, I didn't feel those things very often. And so
yeah,
I loved the therapeutical bat, all of those things. I'd get in my car and scream as well, because I felt it was so foreign to me. It made me feel
yeah,
crazy to yell. Everybody else could yell, but it
yes,
made me feel crazy to bring my emotions back to life. Does that make sense to you?
absolutely. And I think it brings up a really important point that sexual abuse does not occur in a vacuum. There is
Right.
all kinds of emotional abuse going on, and uh, other kinds of abuse in the house. And this emotional abuse to children is what I got was, don't ever be angry, don't ever speak up,
Right.
don't your feelings are total non-importance in our family, and whatever you think doesn't matter to anybody, So I think we have to really overcome that as survivors.
Hugely.
And
Yes.
that's a lifelong, battle. So
Oh, Carol, that's such an important point because sexual abuse can't just stay by itself. You are belittled. I remember I was very young. I must have been about 5, and my dad looked over. He was left-handed and I was eating right-handed. And he said, "No baby girl of mine would eat right-handed." I dropped my fork and picked it up with my left hand, and I'm still left-handed. I'm quite ambidextrous. But people don't understand the severe control that we have. They keep us incredibly close. You talk a lot about your father and his really strict way of eating. You know what I felt through that? Severe control. He controlled everything, including what you ate.
yes.
You know what I mean? And even your mother couldn't cook, nice things for you guys. Even your food was controlled. That's how I felt when I read that.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So part of that emotional abuse is many things are being controlled. You're not, you're put in this little box of what you're allowed to be, and it's nowhere near what you can be.
Exactly.
Right. And healing
Yes.
in making that box much, much bigger. But I also want to say, I've struggled with a real serious eating disorder my whole life. And that's been one of the hardest things to get over. But my food was so controlled by Dad that I
Yes.
had great problems eating normally. So
Well, I actually, that's funny. I want to read this part in your book. It's on page 296, and it says, "Addiction is not a character flaw, but a normal reaction to what occurred. What you did was find a way to survive at any cost." She had a confident expression. Your counselor's talking to you. And then she says, "You should thank yourself for figuring out a way to stay alive and survive." And I write, you haven't read my book yet, but I write about, I think mine was drinking. And I remember this night I was so drunk, but you know what? I got through it. And so I honor whatever made me survive. I honor that. Can you talk a little bit about, each one of us has a different addiction, but my God, it was normal for what we lived through and the terror that
yes,
we had, right? So go ahead and
right.
just talk a little bit about, it's each one of us has one, Carol. I'm just going to tell you, everybody does in the world, but coming through severe childhood trauma, there's no way we could get out of it without something helping us, right?
Yes. And I still find that very hard for me to accept, to thank myself for having that addiction, because it did get me through so much. It did help me
Right.
handle.
What else
Uh,
did we have?
yeah, the thing we have, and I mean, it's the same like with the amnesia and the forgetting everything, and
Yes,
we did everything possible to survive it. And yeah, we have to thank our little child
we
for
do.
coming up with so many things. Another big one for me too was I didn't know who my father was. I didn't know he was the man that was doing this to me, and that's a big part of the memories that have come back. And but yes, the addiction is very hard. It's very hard not to know um, why you do these behaviors, you know, um,
Right.
and yeah, so
Well, and for me, I think what I always try to focus on is not the addiction, but what's underneath it. Sometimes if I find myself drinking too much wine, then I go back and I talk to God, I use my tools and I say, what's bothering me here? But to stay in this loving connection, full of grace with myself that says, you've done amazing. You are not where you were. You've changed, but really to stay in that loving connection, even as adults, and not focus. I heard this one speaker, Joyce Meyer, say, just put more good in. And I love that. You like apply more good instead of focusing on the negative,
I like
because
that.
we're never going to be what we think that we're supposed to be, but we're not what we were yesterday, right? That's what I always tell
No.
myself. I'm better than I was, but I'm not where I'm going to be. And I feel like our journey will be lifelong. I remember asking my counselor, will there ever be a time where I don't have something come back to me? Because this happened on Mother's Day, just this recent Mother's Day. my children sent me this picture, and I'm telling you, my night was destroyed. I was right back in flashbacks, and it was horrible. And I remembered
Oh,
just being raped, several times on that trip, the trip that I talked to you about when we first started. But anyway, he said to me, Jody, I can't say when you're 80, something might not trigger you. Because, like you said in your book, will we ever know our whole story? I don't want to, but I
yeah,
want to be whole, but it'll come
yeah.
back to me if it needs to. Right. And so
Mhm.
that's, it's unsettling to live that way, but it really is a reality, isn't it? Do you resonate with that?
Ab- Absolutely. And, Jody, I'm just getting to know you. And I just bought your book and I'm so excited to read it and find out more of your story. But absolutely, I think one of the things you live with when you forgot so much of it is what else is in there? What else is going to,
Right.
trigger me and cause me to have, a meltdown or whatever. And I'm older and I have the gift of being able to look back on it more. And yeah, I think God lets you know enough to heal and recover,
Yes.
but not more than you can really handle. And
Well,
I also really believe my brain just doesn't have a lot of the stories. So
mhm,
much of the memories, I'm
mhm.
floating on the ceiling. And looking down at it, which is
Oh, let's
an,
talk about that for a minute.
yeah,
When I read that, Carol, when I was a child, so what we're talking about is dissociation, the art of leaving your body. And let me tell you, as a child, from severe trauma, it's a gift to you. I used to get up in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. I had debilitating leg pains all of my childhood, like at
oh,
7, 6, I mean, little. Nobody ever
oh,
came to help me, but I'd wake up and I'd go in the bathroom and I'd sit on the toilet. And Carol, I had taught myself to dissociate. And when I went to the ceiling, I was so happy. When I told my counselor this, he's like, Jody, that's classic dissociation.
yep,
We laughed, but it felt so good, Carol, to be out of my body. So talk about
yes,
that for a minute, because it's really a tool that stays with us. It's hard to, I'd find myself in big board meetings yeah, I had a pretty important job, in my
yeah,
world. And I'd find myself in these meetings and I'd be gone for a minute. Oh,
yep,
I'd come back and I'd think, I have a bright mind, most of us do. And so I could come back and quickly think on my feet. But dissociation, talk about how it was a curse and a blessing and a curse in your life.
yes, it absolutely is. And there's so many levels of dissociating.
Yes.
The first one being no memory, but this is a secondary one of being up in the corner in this
Yes.
inky black or blue sky, and it's completely peaceful. So that's another reason why I really don't have many memories or, specific actual, this is what was going on. As soon as I get to it in therapy, I was up on the ceiling looking down, and you have this peacefulness. And yes, it's a wonderful way to leave this situation you just can't handle. And it's just amazing what a young child can do. And we were pre-language, we were, had no
Yes.
understanding
Right. No
whatsoever.
words for it at all. No words.
Right. uh,
Right.
and it's just amazing what our brains came up with.
It is. And I also want to talk to you about, because this was a theme in your life. And these themes, I think, for people who are looking to, how do I open my memory? Because there's millions of people out there that say, I think this is me, but I'm not sure. Often in your book, you had this theme of this man in the shadows.
Yes.
And for me, I had one reoccurring nightmare. It never changed. My father was bending this lady over, beginning to rape her. It was black and
uh,
white. I had it
yeah,
all of my childhood, but it never continued to the murder. So when we talk about these things, it's so important for us, if we're going to destigmatize and kind of break down what this feels like. This man in the corner, you learn later, is your father, but that figure is with you always. You talk about in your book going to the
yeah,
garage, he's there. Going into your laundry room, he's there.
yeah.
Explore that a little bit with us.
It was again, a type of PTSD, but
Mm-hmm.
this man, uh as I got older in my 20s, all of a sudden I had this man kind of just popping up in my life. And it was always how I saw my father. He was faceless. I didn't know who he was, and he was covered in black and darkness, which is what happened. All of the sexual abuse was the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself again that I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what his face was. And that way I didn't have to know it was my father. But this man would just pop up and, taking the laundry into the laundry room. And that really was alarming to me. I
Mm-hmm.
really felt like I was totally losing it when this happened, and I didn't even tell my husband about it. I was so sure I was going crazy. And luckily, after I remembered and I could identify who this was, he started to fade. But it's kind
Right.
of like your brain hides all these memories from you, but it's slipping out pieces of it.
Yes. Right.
Slipping.
That's why I wanted to say, so for the viewer, what she's describing is she has total amnesia that her father has raped her in her past, but she has this one thing that keeps calling her back. And I think that it's so important for people who are trying to, right? You get into counseling and what do? I've got this memory, like I had this room I needed to go into, and I always knew that. But you, this person, I do think it is that the body keeps the score thing, where our body keeps beckoning us back. Our soul is saying, you've got to come back to me. But it takes a very courageous spirit and a dedication and a very intentional way to say, I'm going to find out what this is, because it feels very real, doesn't it? It feels like that man standing there, doesn't it, Carol? It's not like, oh, there's a
Real.
shadow over there.
Real.
There's terror that comes with it, right? So
Yeah.
you cannot, in PTSD, you cannot vacate and lie about the real feelings you're having. Talk about that, the feelings you had with seeing that man there.
Yeah, it was very scary. And then he'd go away, he'd be there, he'd not be there. And, what the heck was this?
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, this kind of normal mom
Mm-hmm.
trying to understand my
Who has a
life.
great past.
Yeah, it's very crazy making. And I think it was just so scary that my brain could do this. But I do want to say, I think that's kind of a God thing too, that
Mm-hmm.
your brain knows you will never have an okay life until you face this. So it hides and hides it
100%.
and hides it from you until somewhere in your being you feel like, okay, maybe I could handle a little of this, or handling it is better than not handling it. I think you're kind of weighing these two things in your brain, in your subconscious of, is the amnesia better or is it facing it better?
I
What's
I
harder?
so agree with you. I've always felt that, and it comes to you in your dreams. Often you didn't talk
Yes.
about dreams in your book, but I had a lot of dreams that would be reoccurring that I knew, there was something there. Dreams are telling about our past. But I
Yeah.
I always have felt like it's God's way of moving me in the direction that I need to go, which
Yeah.
brings me kind of to this other thing. I always feel that in these situations, God often gets a very bad rap, and 93% of pedophiles use some kind of a religious cover. So I want to ask you, where was God in your early years during this abuse? Could you talk about that?
Um, yes, my family, would go to church. We would go it, but then when we get home, my father would say it was all a bunch of crap. So there was not any real belief, but they would go, I think, to look good and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt very much that God lives within us. I think that's what makes humans really special. I think we have that deep down flame in us that never goes away, and it's the hope. It's the place of hope. It's
Mm-hmm.
the place of knowing you have strength and that the world is good. And I think that flame can get really, really tiny when you're going through this. I think it's for me, the flame was very, very small, but I can remember going into pray in a chapel and just asking God to please help me. I was drowning, and I felt that flame in me. And I really think we have to lean on that, and that God is there, and that God is all around us in our environment. And, um, we have to lean on that for hope during very bleak times. And I learned to go out and really see nature, get out of the house, get out of my, sorrow and all the feelings I was having, and look at the flowers, look at the children playing, try to find the joy in the world
Oh, I
that God
love
gives
that.
us.
I have goosebumps because I've talked to many survivors, and actually many of us do say you find it just going to, I would go sit by, I live by the Columbia River. It's where I was raised in the Pacific Northwest. And there was
Oh,
just something about it. I didn't have to, yeah, you can find God in very interesting places. And I don't mean to kind of segue on that, but it's beautiful. I think that God
mm-hmm.
does give us hope, and he does lead us through that. And so anyway, that's a very strong theme in my life as well. I got into this YWCA support group, and this one woman,
Oh,
after it was over, cross stitched me this little cross stitch, and it says Jody, full of hope. And it was the
oh, wow.
tool that kept, yeah, I love that. It's in my Bible. I love it. It's very very good. Well, that's awesome that he's still with you. I always love to bring that up because there's a lot of God hurt through this thing, and God is
Yes.
not capable of these kind of crimes, but somehow he gets blamed. So one of the
Yeah.
things I kind of wanted to go back with on for a minute was, there seems to be this theme that these sociopaths do very well. And you know what the theme is? They
Mm-mm.
crucify the mothers in these homes. All of the
Mm.
focus is on how messed up and effed up these moms are. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about how, do you believe that your father had a role in kind of designing that everybody was looking at, this is all mom's fault, she's a horrible alcoholic, she's
Mm-hmm.
she's the problem, I'm not the problem, she's the problem? Because these pedophiles will never say they're the problem, it's everybody else. So
Yeah.
I just kind of want to talk about that mom thing. It seems, as I talk to people, it seems kind of this common theme. They really focus on how messed up their mother is, but their mother's not raping their kids in the back room.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I had, yeah, and I absolutely felt it was all my mother. All the problems I had were my mother, and because she was raging, she was drinking way too much,
Mm.
and blacking out, that kind of thing. But I think more now as an adult, how would it be to be married to a sociopath, to
Right.
somebody who really didn't care and really didn't have any compassion? And I think that's what she was very, very angry about. And I also, this still bothers me, I think she understood he was having an affair. She would accuse him of that. But she, of course, had no idea with who. Certainly not her
Oh,
daughter,
right.
right?
Right.
And so she was aware of a number of things that were going on, and so I can really forgive her. Uh, I
Mm.
I get that this was very difficult, even though I still wouldn't wish that on any other kids. What we went through, but
Right.
yeah, I think
You know,
I think
it,
we,
it makes me think, Carol, that the parent who really did indeed love you, a parent who didn't love you, made you convinced that she wasn't the one that was
yes.
loving you, it was him. And these are those stories and this deep, fundamentally dark and evil things that they twist in us. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that your mother had a very real love for you, but it was very complicated for her to live in a house with a pedophile. And like you said, how horrific for our minds. I don't even think have the story that he's having an affair with my child, but she knew
Yeah.
something was desperately wrong in the home. But I bet, Carol, that she really had a love for you, and she was just overwhelmed, probably in the abuse that you guys didn't see that he put on her. And
Yes.
all of those things
Mhm.
that we don't see, those hidden evils that she probably lived through. I just feel like
Yeah.
he was really the aggressor of evil and destroyed that home, but somehow your mom took some blame that probably wasn't hers to own.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it also gets into the passive parent. I think the
Yeah,
passive parent is frequently the good parent, the one we perceive as good. But the passive parent is just as guilty as the one that's maybe causing so many other problems,
right,
and
right.
it's all this gaslighting. Sociopaths
Yes,
are gaslighting constantly of trying to put the blame on other people. And yeah, that's a good point. I think that my mother was very angry for very good reason. She didn't handle it particularly well, but
hmm,
but I think they were trying so hard to have that curb appeal to look like the perfect family. And dad
hmm,
was really pushing that too, that she was kind of between a rock and a hard place. And of course, the men, particularly in those days, were the breadwinners.
right,
And it was very difficult to call out the fathers because it meant financial ruin for the family also. And I'm sure
right,
she was very aware of that, unfortunately.
right, right. Yeah, that
She did truly love her children. She was absolutely overwhelmed. I wrote some of that. I think she never intended to have four children. And she really was more of a career woman. She's very brilliant. And so I think the mothers in that era didn't have choices. They didn't have the birth
mhm,
control, and it was really overwhelming, and having to stay
right,
home with them. You know, so
right. So, talking about that, one of the things that coming through childhoods that we came through, Carol, is there's not much comfort. And it doesn't sound like your mother was a place of comfort for you, unfortunately.
mhm.
Um, those are, have you found comfort in your life? Well, it's a comfort is a very difficult thing for survivors, don't you think?
Yeah, and what I think of with the word comfort is support
Mm,
and love,
mhm.
nurturing that piece. Is that what you're meaning with that?
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
just finding comfort for being raped for years and years and years. That's a difficult thing to find comfort from. I often it's just something, I find a lot of comfort in my children and my grandchildren and obviously in God. And I find comfort in going in my kitchen and cooking great meals because, those kinds of things. But there is this hollow echoing in our soul that says, where's the justice for it? One of the things in your story, wouldn't it be comforting to have put him behind bars? There's some comfort that justice exists here on earth, but where is
Oh,
it, Carol? You know
yeah.
what? And that it's just that's a bit of a segue into that, but maybe I don't know. I've never actually even thought about that, except being with you. I felt so like you were really a sister to me in some of your
Mhm.
words and your story, and that when you talk about the justice, wouldn't there be great comfort in justice?
Yeah.
you know, but you talk about going to the police. Oh, sorry, that was a long time ago. We don't really care anymore. You go
Hmm.
to an attorney and they're like, they'd laugh you out of court. Talk
Yeah.
to me a little bit about when you went to find justice and what you found were shut doors. How did that feel?
Uh, very frustrating, very frustrating. Uh, you know, being older, I have the grace to be able to look back on this process. Um, and at the time, when I remembered it was 91, and at that time there was all kinds of,
Mm,
nobody believed that this happened. Nobody believed that sexual abuse could cause the same kind of reactions as like soldiers had coming back from
right.
wars, where they had severe PTSD. And it was just being discussed. And there's a big organization that just fought this, because all of a sudden people were starting to be accused of sexual abuse. And this was horrifying to society, because such revered people were being accused. So when I went to the police and tried to file charges, it was just laughable. The statutes of limitations, I think, was about 7 years, including sexual abuse. Well, we know now sexual abuse you may not remember for 40 years. So
Right.
statutes of limitations are completely inappropriate for this type of crime. It's a total different animal. And also, even filing civil charges against my father, which I tried, was impossible. I had absolutely no one to corroborate. My siblings thought he was wonderful. His family, I mean, he had everybody saying how wonderful he was. This couldn't possibly have happened. So I had absolutely no recourse. Many of the laws have been changed now. A lot of the statutes have been extended, which is a great trend. Many more need to be extended or gotten rid of altogether. And you're the lawyer, so
yeah, no, I'm not a lawyer, but I supported him for years.
You've been working in law. You'd probably know a
Yes.
lot better than I do. But
Some have been updated. Much more needs to be done. But yeah,
yes.
it's crazy. So I'll be 60 next year. And one of the things that I read in your book that I want to talk about for a minute is when I was confronting my father about the same time period you were. And guess what organization your father used and my father used? My father became a member of the false memory syndrome. OMG. And so I was from the Northwest. That man who started that organization, his daughter lived in Portland. And so there was a big article in the Oregonian where she comes out and says, my father's full of shit. This is exactly what he did. But your dad sent you a letter that said, oh my God. And so, you said a very interesting thing right before this. Society at large doesn't want to accept this. What do you feel about that? Why?
Pardon me?
I said, why? What we're victims.
Why does society not want to accept this? Nobody wants to know this. I remember one of the first things my therapist said is, no one, Carol, wants to know what happened to you. Nobody wants to believe these revered members of society could do this to children. And I think it's really important to note that sexual abuse is a different animal, whereas physical abuse has a lot to do with financial problems in the family and all kinds of other problems. Sexual abuse doesn't. It's occurring across all socioeconomic groups.
Absolutely.
And because of that, you get these, very, the Bill Cosby people, high income, highly revered people that are molesting, he was molesting adults. But there's so many stories where nobody believes it, and it goes on because no one's taking action. And I hope society is starting to realize that the first person who speaks out about this, we have to take very, very seriously, or it will continue and there'll be more and more victims.
The taboo of society helps keep incest alive, and sexual abuse in children is horrific. Incest is even one step darker, and nobody wants to talk about incest, right? Like, so this is what keeps this crime of hell alive. And so as long as I'm on this planet, Carol, you can be sure I am going to come after this crime, because it's a crime. This isn't a family problem. This isn't a taboo of society. This is a crime, and it should be dealt with as a crime, just like any other crime, right? And so that the things like the false memory syndrome foundation or whatever it is now, that's defunct, which it should have been, because it was just a bunch of pedophiles that stood that up. So I just wanted to tell you that is now kind of defunct or failing, which it should be. And
it closed.
Did it close? Yeah, I thought it did.
Closed.
I thought it did. And one of the things is they got so much publicity from newspapers and the news. I mean,
Yes, they did.
I'm stunned that
Yep.
our news people don't want to report on crimes that are occurring
Mhm.
against children, but rather would support pedophiles. I'm abhorred by it, quite honestly. What
I
is
I
wrong?
absolutely am too, and I think that's why it's so critical we speak out,
Yes,
um, because it is still not believed. I mean, my family, siblings, aunts, everybody don't believe at all that I could have come up with these memories. And it is still, I think therapists are accepting it a lot more, but it's very taboo. And
right.
yeah, nobody wants to look at this. It's horrifying. It really is a horrifying crime, and so important to bring up that 90% of sexual abuse
Yes,
is by very close people, a whole
absolutely.
incest, and
Absolutely. You know, and
very
it is. And the other thing I want to say is that survivors are incredibly strong, brave, courageous people. And so if society, if you're scared of us at large, you shouldn't be. You should be scared of these predators. But
yeah.
the stories, don't be scared of our stories. And with that, I want to say, I want you to say how accomplished you are. You have
Mm.
incredible things you've done with your life. You know, with a high school degree, I was a director in a very large law firm. I'm very proud of that. We are
Yes.
brave, strong, capable people, and who
Mhm.
don't those that don't believe us don't have the courage that we have. But you know what, I want to take a minute and I want you to tell us, because this is a beautiful thing, what you've accomplished in life. Carol, share that with
Mhm.
us.
Well, the most important thing I've accomplished is raising my two kids. I
Yes,
am very
beautiful.
proud of them, and they've done really well. And it was just studying and learning how to treat them. And I did everything I could to keep my story away from them until they were grown. I didn't want their childhoods to be about what had happened to me. And of course, I kept the grandfather away after I remembered. But anyway, I'm very proud of them. And my daughter is a top researcher and professor on sexual violence against women.
Oh, that's
Very proud of
wonderful.
that.
Yes.
The excellent work she's doing with that. And I'm very proud that I married a man who was willing to grow with me. We were both very had great issues. I'm sure when we got married, he didn't even know who I was. I didn't know who I was, but he was willing to grow with me, and so that we've been together for 46 years, married for 46 years, and I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations, that's huge.
Thank you. Yeah, and he's a wonderful, wonderful husband. And but I've been able to sing. I've had this interesting connection. My father had this gorgeous voice. It was just stunningly beautiful voice, but he never sang professionally, although he was a excellent classical pianist. And I was the only one of the four children that inherited that voice. And I have sung, all over, uh, primarily classical music, opera, Carnegie Hall.
It's huge.
I've sung
I'm
with
so
Andre
proud of you.
Bocelli. Thank you. So I've had a wonderful career in singing, and but it is my father's voice that I inherited, and so that's always kind of an odd thing. But I'm glad we've traveled all over the world. My husband and I are very interested in anthropology and cultures, and so we've got to do that. And yeah, so I don't know. I've been able to get my master's degree in business, and I have a
It's
lot of interest.
huge.
I've had a fabulous life, and I think it's so critical to know that
Yes.
there's so much hope and so much you can do. I think, like you're talking about, Jody, that we can overcome. I mean, there's a lot of
Yes.
problems I get through much easier than most people. I don't
Yes.
see barriers, and I think it's because we've had to be on survival mode for so
Right.
long. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm a bit of
Absolutely.
a bulldog.
Yeah, I love that. And don't forget your accomplishment of writing your book. And so
Oh, and I wrote my book.
this has been so wonderful. I really want to come back and spend more time with you. Honestly, Carol, this has
Yes.
just been good. We've gone over our time. It's the first time, but I really want
Okay.
to end this with you end your book with this, and I think it's just a beautiful farewell. Thank you so much for being with us here today. This has been absolutely wonderful. But Carol ends her book with, and remember, our first words to anyone coming forward about sexual abuse must be, first, I believe you. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I look forward to getting to know you better. I don't know many people in this world that have the background we have, and we share a great deal. And I hope with all your listeners too, I can get to know some of them better. So thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be on your program.
Wonderful. Thank you.